Hey everybody, welcome back to the wood shop. This is going to be another in the wood shop tips and tricks series. Today we're going to be doing some more tool maintenance, and it will be on this 12.5-inch Craftsman bench planer. We're going to be changing the blades, or actually reversing them. They're reversible blades, sharp on both edges. These have only been used on one edge. We're going to turn those around to the sharp side. We're going to clean up the bed and the infeed and outfeed tables real good. We'll put some wax on them and get them good and slick. We'll lubricate everything that needs lubrication. We'll try to get the infeed and outfeed rollers good and clean, and just an overall cleaning of the whole machine. The first thing we're going to do is take out the knives. Now the knives are fairly easy to get to in this planer. First thing you have to do is remove this dust collection port. It attaches with these two thumb screws. The cutter head cover right here also attaches with two thumb screws. And you can see now, here is the cutter head, and right there is one of the really worn knives, or blade. You can call it knife or call it blade, either one you want. The manual calls it a knife, and I usually call it a knife most of the time. But right there's one of them, and it's really worn. It has 6 screws, and they are Torx bit screws. And it actually comes with its own wrench. Right here it sticks down in the side. It's got the correct size for the Torx bit right there. And all we have to do is take out these 6 screws, reverse the blade, and screw it back down. You also have to watch out about these springs here. You really don't want to lose those. So make sure you keep up with them. And this actually comes with a magnetic tool as well down here on the bottom. That way you don't have to actually touch that sharp blade. You can see, here's the dull side, and over here is the fresh, really sharp edge. But the first thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to take both of these knives out and give this thing a good cleaning before we put them back in. So now I'm going to use the air compressor and this little spray tool to spray out all the dust I can get out of here. Now before I go any farther, I'm going to go ahead and remove both of these side panels. We'll get in there with some compressed air. After that, we'll start cleaning with a damp rag. Okay, over here on this side you can see the sprockets and chains. This sprocket here is actually connected to the gearbox, which is driven by the motor. This chain goes down to this sprocket, which turns the outfeed roller, and the back chain connects up here to turn the infeed roller. Now these chains have plenty of grease on them. We just need to clean all that dust off of them. I think they'll be okay. Now over on this side of the planer is where the cutter head gets driven, and it's driven by a belt straight off the motor. There's no gear ratio reduction here or anything because this side spins a lot faster than the roller side. The only gear ratio difference here is that the pulley down here on the cutter head is a little bit bigger than the pulley at the motor end. Now this side looks pretty clean. I'm going to go ahead and spray it with some compressed air. There's some wood chips in this pulley. We'll go ahead and spray all this out good, and then we'll get started cleaning this with a damp cloth. Alright, I think we've got everything we can get now with compressed air. We're going to go ahead and start cleaning on this now with a damp rag. This rag is just slightly damp, and I'm just going to wipe down everything I can get to. Alright, now you can see there's a lot of pitch or whatever on this cutter head. That's probably going to have to be scraped off unless you use some kind of solvent, and the manual says not to use solvent because these rollers under here are rubber and most solvents will mess with that rubber, so I'm going to try to not use solvent if at all possible. And right in here behind the cutter head, you can see down in there's a lot of pitch all gathered up on that. I'm probably going to have to scrape that off. I don't think there's any way to get a rag down in there. It's really tight. So I'm going to go ahead now and try to start scraping some of this off. Alright, we got our cutter head good and clean now. Once you get that pitch a little bit wet, let it sit a little while. It'll soften up and you can wipe it right off without a whole lot of trouble. We're good and clean down in there behind the cutter head too. You can still see a little bit left over, but it ain't enough to hurt anything. And you don't have to get all that stuff off of there. It's not going to hurt anything. It just depends on how clean you want your planer to be. And you don't have to do this every time you reverse or change blades either. You can maybe do a real good cleaning on it like once a year or something, depending on how much you use your planer. Alright, now we're moving on to the rollers. We got the infeed roller in front, outfeed roller in the back. And these are a little bit tricky because they will not move unless the motor moves them. You can't turn them like the cutter head. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to wipe down the spot that I've got showing right now. Then I will do something a little bit dangerous. I'm going to plug in the planer and just turn it on and right straight back off and let the rollers turn a little bit. Then wipe that spot and do it over again. Just going to use a damp rag for this. And these rollers aren't all that dirty anyway, so we're going to wipe them off just a little bit. Alright, we're getting close now. We're going to clean the planer bed, the infeed and outfeed tables. And for this, I'm going to use mean green. I don't think water is going to be strong enough to get some of this stuff off here. And this is something you probably want to do quite often, is keep your planer bed and your in-feed and out-feed tables good and clean. And after they're clean, you wax and buff. Now the important thing here is to make sure you don't get this on the rollers. Spray it down good, then let it sit for a little bit before you wipe it off. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do before we level up the in-feed and out-feed tables and wax them, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the knives. Alright, these knives have little slots on them, if you can see that, and they line up with these notches right here on the cutter head. And don't forget your springs. They go in the outer screw holes. Now all those are for is just to pop this piece of metal up off the blade, that way you don't have to dig with your hand to get it off and possibly get cut. Now while you're in here, you want to also make sure you've got plenty of grease on your thread post here, and you can see it on top of there. And as this runs down, when you crank the planer down, it kind of self-greases the rod as it goes. You can see how it's leaving behind grease on the rod as it goes down. So we're good there. We've got plenty of grease. It's the same on the other side. You just want to make sure your planer is always going up and down good and smooth. Now if you look at the planer from the bottom, you'll see what happens when you turn this crank handle to lower and raise the planer. It turns that thread post, which actually goes down through the bottom right here, to turn this gear that goes all the way across to the other side and turns that thread rod, which moves over there. So it's an even up and down pressure on both sides. You also got to make sure there is grease on all these gears underneath here. Now I can see plenty here. We're in good shape on this too. But always make sure if any of these gears need grease or these thread rods, add the grease if they need it. Now this is something you should do quite often anyway, but since I'm working on this thing right now, I'm going to go ahead and check for level across the bed and the in-feed and out-feed tables. Now what I'm checking for here is to make sure the board will go across the planer bed, the in-feed and out-feed table, all as if they were one solid surface. You don't want any height differences between here and the planer bed, or the edge and this edge all the way over here. Everything has to be even. And it does look like I need some adjustments. All we got left to do now is add some paste wax, give this thing a nice slick surface, and we'll be done. Now we've got this thing all cleaned up and waxed, new knife edges. We're going to give her a test run with this little piece of oak. Smooth as butter. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this new video in the Woodshop Tips series about tuning up your 12.5-inch Craftsman bench planer. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit that thumbs up and ring the bell to stay up to date on all of our newest videos. Also visit us on Facebook at Wood Songs by Russell and at woodsongsbyrussell.com. Thanks for joining me today and happy woodworking.